The room reacted before she did. Some laughed outright, others let out short, awkward chuckles. A few shifted uneasily, sensing what he meant but too polite to say it aloud. For fun didn't sound like an invitation. It sounded like a dare. Phones slid out of pockets. A couple of students started recording, eager to catch whatever humiliation might come next. She froze for a moment, not in fear, but in calculation. Her eyes lifted slowly to meet his. He expected her to wave him off, to shy away, to prove his point without throwing a punch. But she didn't move. She simply looked at him, steady, unblinking, quiet, and that silence landed heavier than any words she could have spoken. The black belt chuckled, raising his eyebrows as if to push her further. "Come on," he pressed, stretching the syllables. "We'll take it easy. Don't worry, you won't get hurt." Laughter rippled again, this time sharper, tinged with arrogance. A young man in the back whispered, "This is gonna be good." Another muttered, "She's not ready for this." But something in her stillness unsettled the room. She didn't roll her eyes or laugh nervously. She just kept staring. Her hands finished tying her laces, slow and deliberate. The smirk on his face widened, but his eyes darted just once at the phones recording from the edges of the mat. Minutes stretched, though it was only seconds. The crowd leaned forward, caught between curiosity and cruelty. This wasn't a match anymore, it was theater. A stage set by arrogance, fueled by the hunger of an audience that wanted to see a lesson taught at someone else's expense. She finally stood, smoothing the crease of her pants, and took one step forward. The chatter hushed. A shoe squeaked on the mat somewhere, the only sound breaking the tension. She looked smaller compared to him, lighter, softer. But her stare carried weight. It told him she wasn't stepping in for him, or for the crowd. She was stepping in for herself. And in that moment, before a single punch had been thrown, the injustice was already clear. He had chosen her as a target, not a partner. He had mocked her presence instead of respecting it. The laughter, the phones, the whispers, they all sharpened the edge of what was about to unfold. The dojo held its breath. Something extraordinary was about to happen, and everyone could feel it. The room felt heavy, like the air itself had thickened. The challenge still hung in the air, buzzing louder than the fluorescent lights above. For a moment people thought she would turn away, maybe laugh off the dare. But she didn't. She lifted her chin, her lips barely parting, and whispered, "I'll do it." The words were soft, almost fragile, yet they cut through the noise like glass. Heads turned. The laughter died mid-breath. Phones that had been held casually now locked on her with steady hands. She hadn't shouted. She hadn't argued. She didn't need to. That whisper carried something heavier than volume. It carried conviction. The black belt's grin widened, cocky and careless. To him, her words meant victory before the first move. He believed the story had already been written. A man teaching a woman her place, proving the pecking order with a single spar. He stretched his shoulders, eyes glinting with arrogance, convinced the cameras were about to capture a joke at her expense. What he didn't know was the history behind that whisper. He didn't know the years of doors closed in her face. The times coaches told her she wasn't ready when she was already stronger than half the room. The endless lessons about waiting her turn. The constant reminder that her gender, her skin, her presence made her an outsider. Her whisper wasn't submission. It was defiance, layered with every scar of being underestimated. The dojo's walls seemed to lean inward, holding the moment tight. The crowd shifted uneasily, their eyes darting between her calm face and his smug smirk. Some expected her to regret her choice immediately. Others, quietly, hoped to see something different. The silence wasn't comfortable. It was charged, like the crackle before thunder. She walked to the center of the mat slowly, each step measured, deliberate. No rush, no stumble. Just presence. The crowd parted, phones following her like she was carrying fire. When she tied her belt tighter, there was no tremble in her fingers. Her eyes stayed locked on him, not challenging, not pleading, just steady, as if she'd already seen the ending. The black belt bounced on his toes, cocky rhythm in his movements, still certain this was his stage. But even he felt the shift. Her calmness unnerved him. A whisper shouldn't carry so much weight, and yet here he was, fidgeting under the quiet gaze of a woman he thought beneath him. This was no longer about sparring. This was a mirror, held up to every bias that shaped that room. Her choice to step forward transformed his mockery into something else, into a test of dignity, of arrogance, of history itself. The audience leaned in, breaths shallow, waiting for the clash. The air pulsed with a truth no one wanted to admit. This wasn't just a fight anymore. This was a storm about to break, and they were all inside it. The room expected trembling. They expected her to glance at the exits, maybe laugh nervously, maybe back down before it went too far. But she didn't. She lifted her eyes and locked them on him, and the weight of that stare unsettled the dojo more than any fist could have. His smirk faltered for just a second. He wasn't used to that look, the kind that came from someone who had carried years of dismissal and learned to live with it. Her gaze was steady, shaped by rejection letters, by unspoken rules, by every "not for you" tossed casually in her direction. The audience didn't see that history. To them, she was just a woman stepping into a ring against a man, but her stillness carried layers they could not read. Behind it was quiet power, a strength that wasn't loud or flashy, but built carefully through struggle. Every second of her silence was a refusal to play his game. He bounced lightly on his toes, grinning again, trying to shake off the unease. "You ready?" he asked, his tone dripping with condescension. Her reply was nothing more than the tightening of her belt, the lowering of her shoulders into stance. She didn't waste words. She didn't give him the satisfaction of banter. Around the mat, people whispered, "She's crazy," one voice said. Another muttered, "She won't last a minute." Phones held high trembled slightly in their owner's hands. No one wanted to miss what was about to unfold. The referee gave a small nod, and the bell rang. The sound sliced through the air, sharp and final. His smirk returned full force as he stepped forward. But in that moment, as her eyes followed his every move, something shifted. He realized too late that this wasn't going to play out the way he had imagined. Because those eyes weren't the eyes of someone hoping to survive. They were the eyes of someone who had already seen too much to fear another dismissal. They were the eyes of someone who had carried silence long enough to know how powerful it could be when finally unleashed. The crowd held its breath, leaning in, their laughter gone, their grins fading. Something felt different now, and everyone knew it, even if they couldn't say why. When the bell echoed into silence, his arrogance seemed thinner, his confidence more fragile. Her stare told the story he didn't want to hear. This fight would not be his stage. It would not unfold the way he planned. The first step forward was his. The first mistake, too. The black belt lunged forward like a predator, certain the fight would end quickly. His body moved with arrogance, sloppy in its overconfidence, expecting her to flinch. But she didn't. Her feet slid lightly across the mat, a half step to the side, redirecting his momentum with effortless precision. The room gasped. The sound sharp and collective, like air leaving a single lung. Phones tilted suddenly, trying to catch the motion that had looked almost invisible until the result landed. His punch had missed. Hers had not. Her strike landed clean against his torso, controlled, measured but sharp enough to make him stumble. His grin faltered, then returned too quickly, as if plastered on to cover the crack of doubt splitting through him. He straightened, eyes narrowing. He hadn't expected resistance, let alone skill. She didn't move in celebration. She didn't even smile. She simply reset her stance, breathing calmly, her gaze fixed. Whispers spread through the room. "Did you see that?" Someone hissed. Another whispered, "That was luck. Just wait." Yet doubt was already creeping in. The black belt came again, faster this time, heavier. She sidestepped once more, redirecting his force with the ease of someone who knew not to meet arrogance head-on, but to let it destroy itself. Her strike, sharp and precise, found its mark again. The dojo erupted in shock. Gasps and half-shouted words filled the space, but her silence drowned them all out. Her face didn't shift. She moved like water, controlled, unshaken. He rose quickly, anger flashing now where arrogance had lived before. But beneath the flush of his face, doubt deepened. His movements lost rhythm, chasing her instead of commanding. Every strike she delivered told a story, one he hadn't bothered to read. Years of training outside the spotlight. Hours no one counted because they didn't believe she belonged. Lessons learned in silence, stored for a moment just like this. The fight was no longer about strength. It was about control. His ego against her discipline. And for the first time, the dojo wasn't laughing. Silence sat heavy, broken only by the shuffle of feet on the mat, the ragged sound of his breath. Phones stayed locked on the action, but no one dared laugh now, because they could all feel it. Something had shifted. He circled, chest heaving, sweat glistening across his brow. He wanted her to taunt him, to meet his sneers with words, to validate his stage, but she gave him nothing. Only silence. Every strike she landed, she followed with stillness. Every pause, every breath, carried authority. Her silence wasn't emptiness. It was command. He grew reckless, striking harder, faster, but each swing seemed to crash against air. Her calmness was louder than his force. Her pauses forced him to hear his own weakness echoing back. For the first time, the room realized this wasn't entertainment. This wasn't fun. This was exposure. The black belt's grin had disappeared entirely, replaced by clenched teeth and narrowed eyes. His arms grew heavy. His breath shortened. His confidence cracked with each failed attempt. And through it all, she remained still, focused, quiet. The silence became suffocating, wrapping the dojo tighter than any chokehold. The students, the parents, the onlookers, they couldn't look away. They leaned forward, wide-eyed, feeling every second stretch. Even the phone's recording seemed quieter, their owners too stunned to speak. Somewhere someone whispered, "She's not just surviving, she's winning." He heard it too, and it burned. This was not the fight he promised. It was not the lesson he meant to teach. Instead, he was learning, painfully, that silence could be louder than any roar. What had started as arrogance was now unraveling into humiliation, one quiet moment at a time. The rounds dragged on, though to the crowd it felt like moments suspended in eternity. Each exchange tilted the balance further. She didn't just defend, she dominated. Her strikes were precise, her movements measured, her focus unbreakable. Gasps rippled across the dojo. Laughter had vanished, replaced by awe and disbelief. Every time she landed clean, heads turned, eyes widened, and whispers flew. Phones streamed the fight live, comments exploding across platforms. "She's incredible. Did you see that move?" He underestimated the wrong person. The dojo was no longer his territory. With each second, it became hers. Even he felt it. The way the air had shifted. The way the crowd, once on his side, now leaned toward her. The weight of every phone raised against him, capturing not his dominance, but his unraveling. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She simply stood, steady and relentless, as if reminding everyone that this wasn't spectacle, it was justice. Injustice was winning. The myth of invincibility cracked with every stumble he made. The so-called champion, the untouchable black belt, was cornered. Not just by her fists, but by truth. She dismantled his defenses methodically, showing patience where he showed desperation. Each strike wasn't only physical, it was symbolic, cutting through years of illusion that power belonged only to men, to arrogance, to whiteness. The crowd could feel it. Generations of exclusion dissolving in front of them. The space no longer looked the same, it no longer belonged to him, and the cameras caught every second, every gasp, every reversal of narrative. What began as mockery was becoming history. The final blow came swift and clean. The strike that echoed through the dojo like thunder. He collapsed, gasping, stunned, the mat trembling beneath him. For a split second, silence reigned. No laughter, no whispers, just the heavy sound of his breath and her calm stance above him. Then gasps erupted, rippling through the room, only to fade again into stunned stillness. This wasn't supposed to happen. Yet it had. The weight of the moment pressed on everyone present. Her victory wasn't just hers, it was symbolic. It belonged to everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The dojo could no longer contain it. The world would see it, and nothing would be the same. Within minutes, the clips were everywhere. Shaky phone angles from different corners of the dojo flooded online, each one capturing the same impossible moment. The black belt sprawled on the mat, the woman standing silent above him, the sound of gasps, the silence that followed, it all replayed on loop. People didn't just watch, they reacted. Comments exploded under every upload. "She destroyed him," one shouted. Another wrote, "Luck." He wasn't serious. Between the cheers and the jeers, a storm took shape. Hashtags appeared like sparks. Dojo justice. Silent strength. By the hour's end, they trended. Strangers across the world argued in real time, dissecting every frame of the fight. Some slowed the footage down, freeze-framing her strikes, pointing out the precision in her movements. But the video didn't lie. The video told its own truth. On one screen, a college student whispered into her camera, "Do you see the way she moves? That's not luck. That's years of training nobody gave her credit for." On another, an older man shook his head and muttered, "I've been practicing 30 years. That strike was flawless." The comments raged and rippled. History, humiliation. Finally, each voice added to the roar. And still, through all the noise, one image burned brighter than the rest. The calm on her face as she stood above him, not gloating, not boasting, simply present. That image was shared more than the knockout itself. Memes, edits, slow-motion remixes. It spread like fire. Within a day, the clip reached millions. Then tens of millions. From Tokyo to London, Cape Town to Chicago, people pressed play, watched the strike and gasped with the same stunned silence that had swept through the dojo. In living rooms, strangers paused mid-dinner to replay it. In offices, employees huddled around glowing screens, whispering. On buses, headphones buzzed with commentary, arguments, and admiration. What had begun as a dare meant to humiliate was now far beyond his control. It was bigger than her too. The story had become a mirror, reflecting power and arrogance, discipline and dignity. And she, quiet, unassuming, steady, became something larger. She was no longer just a woman who fought back. She was no longer just a fighter in a small room with mats and sweat. The narrative had outgrown the dojo. Now it belonged to the world. Humiliation doesn't sit well with power. Within hours of the viral storm, the dojo's leaders huddled together behind closed doors, voices sharp and anxious. They needed a plan. Something to drag the spotlight away from the woman who had turned their champion into a meme. The first statement came quickly. Posted online, polished but shaky between the lines. The match had been unofficial. It wasn't sanctioned. It wasn't serious. They framed it as a light-hearted spar taken out of context. She was lucky, the statement read. The black belt was not going full strength. But the footage told another story. Commenters replayed every second in slow motion, pointing out the precision of her movements, the discipline in her strikes, the panic on his face as she dismantled him. The claim of luck fell apart instantly. Screenshots flooded feeds, his clenched jaw, her steady focus, the knockdown landing clean. Still, they pushed harder. The black belt himself released a video, sitting stiffly in front of a banner draped behind him. He forced a laugh, claiming, "I was going easy on her. I didn't want to hurt her. You can't take these things too seriously." The comments tore him apart. "Then why does your face look terrified?" one wrote. Another, "Funny, I've never seen someone go easy while gasping for air." Memes multiplied, side-by-side images of his words and the video itself. The contrast was undeniable. Each attempt to minimize her only deepened her impact. The more they insisted she didn't matter, the louder the world declared that she did. News outlets picked it up. Headlines read, "Dojo scrambles after viral knockout. Black belt claims easy match, video shows otherwise." The story refused to die. Their excuses only fueled the flames. Behind the scenes, whispers leaked from students and parents. They knew the truth. This wasn't about a spar gone wrong. It was about arrogance, bias, and the humiliation of being proven wrong on camera. The dojo's reputation wasn't slipping. It was unraveling. And through it all, she said nothing. She didn't release statements, didn't argue, didn't clap back. Her silence was louder than their spin. While they scrambled, she trained. While they spoke, she breathed. While they lied, she stood still, and the stillness was devastating. Every smear campaign has a weakness. This one's was visibility. Millions had already seen the truth with their own eyes. No press release could erase it. No interview could override it. What was meant to silence her only amplified her quiet power. The harder they tried to bury her, the higher she rose. The smear campaign spread fast, but support came faster. Her inbox lit up. Messages poured in from strangers who had seen the clip. People who recognized themselves in her fight. Women who had been laughed out of gyms. Fighters of color who had trained hard but been sidelined. Activists who saw in her silence the kind of power movements are built on. The first message was simple. "Thank you. You fought for all of us." Another read, I quit martial arts after being told I'd never make it. Watching you reminded me why I started. Former students of the dojo began speaking out. Anonymous posts at first, then names attached. They told stories of exclusion, of favoritism for those who looked the part, of women used as token members but never given equal opportunities. One wrote, "She proved in 5 minutes what we'd been saying for years." Veterans of martial arts, some respected masters added their voices. They dissected the footage publicly, pointing out her precision, her composure, her discipline. This wasn't luck, one insisted. This was skill, refined and undeniable. Former champions, long retired, began sharing stories too. About the barriers no one liked to admit existed. About the competitions where talent was overlooked if it came from the wrong face, the wrong body, the wrong voice. The messages stacked higher, faster, until her phone felt like it vibrated with every heartbeat. She read them in private. Sitting cross-legged on her floor, the glow of the screen lighting her face. Her chest tightened. Tears slid quietly down her cheeks, not of sadness, but recognition. For years she had carried silence like a shield. Now that silence had become a voice shared by millions. What had begun as one fight in a room padded with mats was no longer hers alone. It belonged to everyone who had ever been excluded, dismissed, underestimated. She whispered aloud to herself, barely audible, "They see me." And in that whisper, a truth took shape. She hadn't been fighting only him. She had been fighting an entire system. And now, the system was being called to answer. The fight was no longer contained in a dojo. It was everywhere. The dojo had always been untouchable. Parents paid good money. Students wore the logo with pride. And the master's word was rarely questioned. But now, cracks spread like fractures in glass. Sponsors were the first to back away. Quietly at first, emails citing reputation concerns. A nutrition brand pulled its banner from the walls. A gear company canceled a contract. Parents followed. Enrollment inquiries slowed, then stopped. Some demanded refunds. Others pulled their children out overnight. "I don't want my daughter learning in a place like this," one mother posted online, her words shared thousands of times. Former students spoke louder now, emboldened by the viral storm. Stories of favoritism spilled out. Stories of bullying swept under the mat. Stories of students punished for questioning authority. The media picked up the pattern. Headlines cut deeper than any punch. Dojo exposed for culture of exclusion. Viral knockdown raises bigger questions. Reporters called it not just an incident but a symptom. The dojo tried to fight back with polished statements, but the words rang hollow. Each denial was drowned out by testimonies, by video, by evidence stacked higher every day. The master, once revered, stopped appearing in public. The black belt, once untouchable, faced ridicule at every turn. Outside the dojo, protesters gathered with signs. "Respect is the standard. Silence is power. End the bias." Inside, the mats felt emptier. The students who remained trained under a cloud of doubt, whispers swirling with every drill. The once confident rhythm of the dojo had collapsed into unease. What had been dismissed as a minor embarrassment was now something bigger. It was no longer about one fight, but about the culture that fight revealed. The gatekeepers trembled. For the first time, their fortress didn't feel indestructible. Journalists began digging, searching for the woman at the center of it all. Who was she? Where had she trained? Why had no one heard of her before this fight? The answer shocked even those who had cheered loudest. She had trained quietly for years, not in flashy gyms or high-level competitions, but in community spaces, church basements, and borrowed studios. Her mentors were not famous, but they were disciplined. They taught her to move with precision, to strike with purpose, to let arrogance burn itself out. She had tried to enter mainstream competitions. Doors closed quickly. Paperwork went missing. Her applications overlooked. Too often she was told she wasn't ready. Meanwhile, less skilled fighters advanced. Because she was a woman. Because she was black. The story came together piece by piece. Accounts from old coaches. Footage of small tournaments where she had dominated but received no recognition. A pattern so clear it was impossible to ignore. What looked like a spontaneous act in that dojo was not luck. It was the culmination of years of discipline, silence and resilience. Every strike she landed that night carried the weight of those years. News outlets reframed the story. Not an upset, A revelation. The fighter. They tried to hide. Power earned in silence. The public realized the truth. Her victory was never accidental. It had been earned, built, sharpened, ignored by some, but undeniable now. Her story was no longer invisible. It was center stage. Admiration grew. But so did something darker. The brighter her story shone, the sharper the shadows became. Anonymous accounts flooded her inbox. You embarrassed him. You'll regret it. Others sneered. Angry black woman, stay in your place. The language was venomous. Designed to sting. To drag her back into silence. Critics on talk shows called her unfeminine. Others labeled her disrespectful, claiming she had humiliated a respected black belt. Trolls created memes meant to reduce her to stereotypes. But she didn't respond. She didn't argue. She trained. She breathed. She waited. Her refusal to join the noise frustrated her detractors. The silence that had disarmed him in the dojo was now disarming the digital mob. Every insult bounced into emptiness, and that emptiness was louder than their rage. Her supporters doubled down. They countered hate with love, amplifying her dignity. Messages of encouragement drowned the threats. Communities rallied, organizing online campaigns under the same hashtags. Dojo justice. Silent strength. The threats didn't stop, but neither did she. She knew silence was not weakness. It was resistance. And in that resistance, she grew stronger. The story was no longer about one dojo, one fighter, or one match. It had become a movement. Activists called for reform across martial arts institutions. They demanded equal opportunities, transparent rankings, and accountability for bias. Protests formed outside the dojo itself. Signs raised high, chants echoing through the streets. Social media surged. Every post about her fight tied into larger calls for justice. This is bigger than martial arts. This is about dignity. Politicians began to notice. Some released statements of support, careful not to miss the wave. Others remained silent, but their silence only amplified the urgency. The energy felt unstoppable. It wasn't just outrage, it was organized. Voices once scattered had converged into a storm. And at the center of it, without saying much at all, stood her. Investigations followed. Journalists and activists dug deeper, uncovering patterns across martial arts schools nationwide. Reports surfaced of women barred from higher-level competitions, of black students sidelined, of instructors protecting reputations rather than nurturing talent. Parents came forward with stories. Students shared experiences. Documents leaked, revealing favoritism baked into ranking systems. Mainstream outlets tied it together, framing her fight as the spark that lit the fire. It wasn't about one man's arrogance. It was about the system's rot. The black belt's smirk became a symbol. His downfall was replayed not just as humiliation, but as exposure. The silence of the dojo that night now read as complicity. The system could no longer hide. Her victory did more than silence a room. It ignited something larger. Across the country, organizations that had been working quietly in the shadows began to gather strength. Coalitions formed, demanding diversity in martial arts leadership, demanding fairness in competition, demanding an end to the quiet exclusion that had kept so many fighters in the margins. Female fighters organized demonstrations, not of protest alone but of skill. Parks and community centers filled with showcases, rows of women moving in unison, breaking boards, sparring with discipline and grace. Videos of these gatherings spread online, echoing the same hashtags born from her fight. Silent strength was no longer about one woman. It had become a banner. She was invited to speak, though speaking had never been her way. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't a public figure. But her presence carried what words often couldn't. At rallies and training camps, she would step onto a stage, bow once, and simply stand there. The crowd would quiet, as if in respect for the silence itself. When she did speak, her voice was soft. "This is not about me," she said once, her eyes scanning rows of young girls clutching their belts. "It's about us. It's about who belongs." That was all. Yet the applause thundered long after. Activists noted how her calmness steadied the movement. She didn't fuel anger, she fueled clarity. And clarity proved contagious. Journalists called it a movement built on whispers. Commentators marveled that in an age of noise, her restraint made her more powerful than endless speeches. She had become more than a fighter. She was now a leader Not by choice but by necessity. Not because she sought the role but because history demanded it. Every quiet appearance moved audiences more than slogans or chants ever could. And with each passing day, the fight that began on a padded mat grew into something undeniable. A movement was here, and it was not going away. The dojo that once stood as a fortress of reputation now shook at its foundation. Sponsors had fled, students had left, and now the walls themselves seemed thinner, less certain. The reckoning came swiftly. The master, long considered untouchable, was forced to resign. Years of whispers about favoritism and bias had finally broken into the open. His departure, once unthinkable, became inevitable. The black belt who had mocked her was suspended indefinitely. What he had imagined as a joke had become a scandal, his name tied permanently to arrogance undone by truth. His fall was public, replayed endlessly in clips and headlines. Lawsuits followed. Former students filed claims of discrimination and abuse of authority. Parents who once trusted the dojo demanded accountability. The institution that had thrived on prestige now drowned in paperwork and shame. Reputations crumbled. Instructors who once walked proudly now avoided eye contact in grocery stores, whispers trailing them. Enrollment plummeted. The dojo became a cautionary tale. What they had tried to make her a spectacle, an embarrassment, became their own reality. Not because of her fists, but because of what the truth revealed. The fight they meant as humiliation had turned into their undoing. The movement reached higher than any dojo. National martial arts federations, pressured by public outrage and activist demands, announced sweeping reforms. Equity boards were established to monitor fairness. Transparent ranking systems replaced the hidden handshakes and favoritism of old. Safe reporting channels were created, giving students a voice against bias or abuse without fear of retaliation. Mandatory inclusion training became law across schools. Posters went up in gyms, community centers and schools, carrying a simple message: respect is the standard. Journalists traced the reforms back to one spark. The moment a woman whispered, "I'll do it," and proved the arrogance of a black belt wrong in front of the world. What began as a dare had transformed into accountability. No one could dismiss it as luck anymore. No one could erase the footage, the protests, the voices that rose because of it. Instructors who once scoffed now adjusted their teachings. Parents who once hesitated now enrolled their daughters proudly. It wasn't perfect. Change never is. But for the first time, the system itself was bending. Her fight had written itself into policy. She returned to the dojo quietly. One evening when the mats were empty and the air was still, there were no cameras, no reporters, no crowd waiting to cheer or jeer. Just students in uniform, bowing in respect as she stepped onto the floor. The space looked the same, but it wasn't. The laughter that once filled the corners had been replaced with something else. Something quieter. Something humbler. She didn't gloat. She didn't linger. She simply stood in the spot where she had once been mocked, her eyes scanning the room. The silence was no longer heavy with dismissal. It was filled with recognition. For her, closure didn't come with applause. It came with peace. She bowed once, a gesture of respect to the space that had tried to break her, but ended up remade by her presence. Then she turned and walked out, leaving behind not bitterness but transformation. The dojo no longer defined her. She had defined it. The city hums with ordinary life, traffic rolling steady. Vendors calling out, children skipping across sidewalks. Yet for her, each step feels layered with something greater. Something she never asked for, but now cannot deny. As she walks, faces turn toward her, not with the sharp curiosity of gossip, but with a softer recognition. A man waiting at the corner meets her eyes and nods once, firmly, as though words would be too small. A child points, whispering to her mother, and then waves shyly, unsure if it's allowed. She smiles, raising her hand in quiet return. The child beams, and the mother places a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder, pride flickering across her face. These gestures are simple, but they carry the weight of history. She is no longer defined by that single night in the dojo. Not by the strike, the gasp, the silence that followed. That fight was only a spark. What endures now is the fire it lit, the reforms written, the coalitions formed, the voices unleashed. The moment that was meant to humiliate her had instead unfolded into something none of them could contain. Every glance from a stranger carries echoes of that transformation. The bus driver who tips his cap when she passes, the young girls practicing kicks in the park, imitating her calm stance. The older woman who whispers, "You reminded me of myself long ago," before walking away with tears shining in her eyes. Her quiet strength became a movement. Her silence, once mistaken for weakness, proved louder than a roar. She thinks of the years she trained unseen, her name left off rosters, her skill overlooked. She thinks of the time she heard doors close with a polite smile masking exclusion. Those memories no longer sting in the same way. They have become part of the story others now tell, proof that dismissal does not erase worth. A mural on a brick wall stops her. She hadn't known it was there. Her own figure towers across the paint, fists raised not in celebration but in calm defiance. Beneath it are the words, "Respect is the standard." She stares at it for a long moment, feeling both pride and distance. That image is her, but it also isn't. It belongs to everyone who once heard "You don't belong." The legacy she carries is not hers alone. It lives in the nods of strangers, the waves of children, the whispered thanks of those who finally feel seen. It belongs to the countless voices that her silence gave room to rise. She walks on, blending back into the rhythm of the city. She does not need to stop, to explain, to declare victory. The legacy moves with her, quiet but undeniable, living in every step, every glance, every whisper that follows her down the street. What began as one fight has become history. History often chooses its authors in silence. Not in grand declarations, not in the echo of stadium crowds, but in the steady unfolding of moments that refuse to be forgotten. Her story is one of those. It began in a crowded dojo with laughter aimed at her, with a challenge dressed as a joke. It could have ended there, dismissed as spectacle. Instead, it became a turning point. Now her name lives in places she never imagined. It is etched in reform documents, cited in policy drafts, carried into boardrooms where leaders once scoffed at change. Equity committees reference her as the reason for their work. Training manuals show her image beside the words "Respect is the standard." Even those who never knew her name still know the story. Silent fighter who answered mockery not with anger but with calm, undeniable strength. Her image has become a symbol, not the clip of the final strike, though millions still replay it, but the frame after, her standing quietly while her opponent gasped for air. The dojo frozen in stunned silence. That image appears on posters in schools, painted in murals on city walls, shared endlessly online as proof of what dignity looks like under fire. It has outgrown her. The dojo's silence that night spread outward. At first it was just a pause, a held breath, a crowd unsure of what they had seen. But silence carries power when truth fills it. That silence rippled through institutions that had long ignored injustice. One school changed its policies, then another. Soon, federations shifted, national boards rewrote their rules, and competitions opened doors that had been locked tight for generations. She never shouted for this. She never demanded recognition. Yet the system shook because of her presence. Quiet power, underestimated for so long, proved itself unstoppable. Commentators reflect on her story as paradox. The fighter who spoke least but changed the most. The woman mocked as an outsider who became the center of reform. In an age of endless noise, it was her restraint that cut through. Her silence commanded where speeches could not. Children now step into gyms believing they belong. Not because she promised them, but because she showed them. Women tie their belts tighter, remembering the night arrogance crumbled under calm. Men who once doubted bow in respect, acknowledging what cannot be erased. And she? She continues walking streets, training quietly, refusing the pedestal. She lives not as a celebrity, but as a reminder. That history is not always written by the loudest voice. Sometimes it is written by the strongest heart. The story closes not with fireworks, not with noise, but with reflection, with a whisper that became a roar across nations, with the truth that what was meant to diminish her instead defined an era. The fight that began as fun became a fracture in the walls of arrogance. Through that crack, light poured, reshaping not only a dojo but an entire system. Her power was never loud. It was quiet. And in the end, that quiet became history.